All right, guys. We're right about here at this point. The season is days away. Training camps are wrapping up. It's time to do another AFC Tour video. And unlike last year, where I was able to kind of go around and do this physically, I had to do this virtually. I watched all of these streams from the Steelers. I watched all of these streams from the Ravens. I watched whatever I could out of Bengals camp, and I connected with a bunch of people who are closer to those situations. The Engraving Videos, shout out to him. SCG Sports. Tony, Steelers Country on Twitter. You know him from AFC North Talk, which, by the way, subscribe to that. Of course, my guy Ace Boogie for the Cincinnati Bengals. Make sure you subscribe to those guys' each individual YouTube channels, and also make sure that you subscribe to AFC North Talk, where I collaborate with most of these guys on a weekly basis. But thanks to those guys, I've been able to get a pretty clear picture on what I feel like the AFC North looks like at the end of camp. So let's talk about it. Real quick before this video starts, I want to make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell so you can be notified. I'm going to be uploading a ton during the season. It's here. It's here. It's less than like a week away. It's here. Whoo, man, aren't you guys getting excited? So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're notified so you don't miss a single thing once football gets started back again, and it's so close I can taste it. So make sure you're subscribed. But the AFC North has been an interesting division over the last few years, and I think this year might be the apex or the beginning of a new start for the AFC North with a bunch of different narratives going on at once. You have the Baltimore Ravens, who have the unanimous MVP returning for a second season on a team that defensively looks better than they did last year. You have the Cleveland Browns, a team that had a lot of expectations last year, had a great roster last year, but could not live up to those expectations, could not play up to that level, largely due to coaching issues and structural issues with the team. This year, they hope to have that settled. This year, they're returning a lot of that talent, so there is some continuity there. And this year, they're expecting big things from Kareem Hunt, big things from Nick Chubb, big things from Baker Mayfield. And that will be interesting because no team in this division, no team in the NFL really has that level of weapons that the Browns have. But it's all about, can they put it together in time in a shortened offseason because of everything that's happened. And then you have the Cincinnati Bengals, who might be one of the most interesting teams in the NFL, period, because they have Joe Burrow, who's looked amazing throughout camp. You also have all of these young wide receivers who look like they're budding out to be some of the better wide receivers in the league. I'm talking about Tyler Boyd. I'm talking about Alden Tate. I'm talking about even a guy like John Ross, who's had a bad camp so far because he just hasn't been on the field, but still runs a 4.2 40 and still has the insane potential to be really good in this offense. The Bengals have so much talent. I even mentioned Joe Mixon on offense. And if Joe Burrow is half of what people expect him to be, that team could be very, very dangerous. And you have a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who a lot of people are expecting a lot of things from, but, you know, I think differently about what people should expect from the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. So what I'm going to do is break this video down into 4 different parts. I'm going to talk about each team. I'm going to talk about each team's pros, cons, and then I'll give a prediction for where I think that team will be record-wise at the end of the season. So let's start with the division winner, the 2-time champs, the Baltimore Ravens. Now, when you talk about the pros on the Baltimore Ravens, you talk about the good things about the Baltimore Ravens, the conversation starts specifically at Lamar Jackson because he's that good. They're really good. And when you talk about passing the ball and running the ball, they're going to be really solid in that era. Even if Lamar Jackson does not develop a single bit from what he looked like last year, they'll still be one of the better teams in the NFL offensively. They have better running backs this year. I thought Gus Edwards was a really good second running back in this system, but they drafted J.K. Dobbins, so now they're going to have even more depth in that running back room. And it's a running back room which I think is sneakily one of the better ones in the NFL that nobody's really talking about. The offensive line is all returning. The tight ends are still there. Great blockers on both of those ends. So they're going to be able to run the ball a ton. There's no stopping the Baltimore offense when it comes to them running the ball. They have great tight ends. They'll be able to do, at the very least, exactly what they did last year, and exactly what they did last year got them to 14-2. So that's going to be interesting. They also improved this defensive line. They added Calais Campbell. They added Derek Wolfe. They added so many guys to this defensive line. It's ridiculous. And it was one of their weak points last year, not having enough depth. Now it's one of their strengths. So now this team, which had a little bit of a problem stopping the run, as you saw against that game against Tennessee, now they seem to have filled that gap in pretty solidly and look to become one of the better defensive line units in the NFL. But let's talk about the cons. And when you talk about the defensive line, the interior of that defensive line is fantastic. One edge of it is pretty good. The other edge, huge question mark. Don't know who's going to step up there. Don't know where that production is going to come from. That is a below average part of this team, is the second edge rusher for the Baltimore Ravens. Also in a below average part of this team is going to be their wide receiving room. I understand a lot of people have a lot of hope for Marquise Brown, but right now, I just don't see him being a number one wide receiver. I think he's very similar to somebody like Ted Ginn, who's best as a second option in a wide receiving room. I think you need a strong number one receiver to get the best out of Marquise Brown. I don't think the Ravens are in the right position roster-wise to get the most out of Marquise Brown. So I don't expect him to have this huge breakout year. He might get close to 1,000. He might even break 1,000, but I don't think he's going to do much beyond that. And I don't think he's a number one wide receiver. And I don't think they have a number one wide receiver on this roster. They went with the young receivers. They're looking all right, but none of them look like a number one wide receiver in the NFL. Now, what is a number one wide receiver in the Ravens system? That might be a different question, and a question worth asking, and a question that might allow Marquise Brown to be a number one wide receiver. But from what I saw last year, I just don't see it happening this year. Also, another area where they're below average is free safety. No Earl Thomas. That's a big deal. People can slander Earl Thomas all they want to act like he wasn't good last year, but he was good enough to do a lot of things for that Baltimore defense. And now that he's not there and you're replacing him with Deshaun Elliott, who, you know, he's played like 5 or 6 games in the NFL in 3 years. So one, not reliable from a health standpoint. Two, even if you're going to say the 6 games that he played were good, that's not a large enough sample size to really know what this guy's all about, especially since when he played, he wasn't necessarily taking most of the snaps at the position. So now he's going to be in a position where he has to take most of the snaps. Now he's going to be in a position where he's going to be asked to do a lot more. I think it's a gamble on the Ravens' part to think that he's going to be able to do that. They're going to put Jimmy Smith in there at free safety to kind of make up for that. But Jimmy Smith has had his issues when you ask him to cover more space on the defense. So that all creates a little bit of a hole on that Ravens defense that was patched up pretty well with the defensive line problems. It's just unfortunate they had those issues with Earl Thomas, because this defense would have been one of the better ones in the NFL without that issue. Now they have a hole that could be exploited during the season. So where do I think this Ravens team is going to end up at the end of the year? I think they're going to be 12-4. I think they're obviously going to be one of the better teams in the division. They're obviously going to contend for a bye week in the AFC. I don't know if they get it. I don't know if they're going to be the hot team this year, but they're definitely going to be a team that's going to be dangerous come playoff time. And this might be the year that Lamar takes those extra steps to get the team over this small playoff hump that they've had over the last 2 years. So Baltimore Ravens, 12-4. That's what I think they're going to do in 2020. Let's talk about the most interesting team in this division, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Bengals pros are going to start with offense, and they're almost all going to be on offense, right? Because Joe Burrow is a massive deal. Number 1 overall pick, has had one of the best passing seasons in college football history in the toughest conference in college football. So that's a significant deal. He's going to be coming to the NFL. He's looked good so far, and if he's good, they have a lot of young wide receivers that can take advantage of him being good. You know, AJ Green's not young, but AJ Green's still there. They have Tyler Boyd, they have Alden Tate, they have John Ross, they have all of these wide receivers. Now they lack in tight ends and they lack on offensive line, but we'll get to that when we talk about the cons. But the wide receiver room for this Bengals team is one of the more interesting ones. If Joe Burrow can get right, if this offensive line can be decent, and that wide receiver room can start to spread their wings a little bit, this could be one of the best offenses in the NFL. And I haven't even talked about Joe Mixon, who's one of the better running backs in the NFL. Is he elite? I don't think he's put out elite production just yet, but he's one of the better running backs in the NFL, most certainly. And this defensive line is definitely going to be a pro for the Cincinnati Bengals. You have the consistency of a Carlos Dunlap. Now you added Mike Daniels as well as DJ Reader to the inside of that defensive line to help Geno Atkins, who did have a down year last year, but with all that help around him now, it looks like it's getting better. And then you have Sam Hubbard, who's a young edge rusher that I think has played pretty well throughout his first few seasons in the NFL. So that's a very good defensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think that's going to be very helpful for this team given what their problems are. Speaking of their problems, let's talk about the cons of the Cincinnati Bengals. This offensive line is completely unknown. Jonah Williams has looked good, but they're still starting Bobby Hart at right tackle. They still have some question marks on the inside. You know, it's a big question mark if that offensive line can improve. Now, offensive lines have made huge jumps in seasons. They also have made huge step backs in seasons. So it's not out the question to think that this offensive line could be decent or even good for the Cincinnati Bengals. Another place where the Bengals have a ton of question marks is the secondary. Now, they did a lot to address this secondary during the offseason, but unfortunately, they've been hit with all kind of weird stuff when it comes to the secondary. You know, injuries here and there, a bunch of different situations going on with the Bengals in that secondary. So not a lot of continuity, not a lot of time to get that together, and then just a lot of injuries as well. That Bengals secondary might have some issues if that defensive line specifically is not going to be as good as they project out to be. But if that defensive line is good, some of these issues can be mitigated a little bit. And then the last con with the Bengals is that they're just still a young, raw team. And what I mean by that is that Joe Burrow is still in his rookie year. You know, all of these guys are still very young. Like, it might not be their year to surprise the league and make the playoffs, but it might be a very good year coming off a year where they got the #1 overall pick. So with all that being said, I'm going to say the Cincinnati Bengals are actually going to go 7-9 this year. I think they're going to have an exciting season. I think they're going to have a good season. I think their defense is going to cost them some games. I think the offense is not going to be as consistent as you would like it in its first year, but it's going to show moments of brilliance. And I think that's going to all lead to the Bengals having a 7-9 record, which I think is a nice improvement to what they did the year before. Okay, so let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because if you're talking about good things about this Pittsburgh Steelers team, there are a few good things that I think should be noted. Defense. As impressive as the Bengals' potential on offense is, the Steelers' defense is good right now. So they have TJ Watt, they have Devin Bush, they have Joe Hayden, they have Minkah Fitzpatrick, they have Steven Nelson. They have a lot of good defensive players. This defense will be good. Will they be as good as some people thought they were last year? No, I don't think how good people thought that defense was last year was as good as that defense was. I thought they were a little overrated, but I don't think they'll be that good. But I think they'll be very good. They'll be one of the better defense. I would be surprised if they fell out of the top 5 when it comes to DVOA defensive rankings at any part of this year. They're going to be good. And defensively, they have a ton of continuity, which is going to be a huge plus for them because of the shortened offseason. There's not really a lot of moving parts on that defense. And then the young wide receivers, Deontay Johnson, somebody I like a lot. Chase Claypool has had an excellent camp. You know, Ryan Switzer has looked like he's stepped up in camp so far. You know, all the reports from all the young receivers are very good at this point. So that's the good things about this Steelers team. Let's talk about the bad things. I know I've said this a million times, but I feel like it needs to be said just a little bit more because I don't think people understand the gravity of this statement. Big Ben is 38 years old, coming off of a surgery on his throwing arm. 38 years old. Elbow surgery. You could throw Peyton Manning at me all you want, but the fact is when Peyton Manning was 38 years old coming off an injury, he was terrible. So I don't know what gives people this confidence that Big Ben's going to be back. Big Ben having a good season, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely. I think people should understand it. It's not likely at all. This is unlikely. This is less than 50% chance of happening, in my opinion. Also, this offense is much worse than the offense that he last played a full season with in 2018. Juju, step back from what he looked like in 2018. James Conner, step back from what he looked like in 2018. Everywhere else, other than the offensive line, they look pretty average. The wide receiving room is young and as much potential there is pretty average. They have nobody who's really stepping up. Still don't have a #1 wide receiver. I said this for the Baltimore Ravens. It's definitely there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And even the part of this offense that's not average, the offensive line has had some injury issues. They've also moved guys around on that offensive line. So there's a lot of moving parts on that offensive line. in comparison to years past where there weren't any moving parts on that offensive line or on that offense. And that's where I get into the second part, because people, when they say Pittsburgh's going to be a contending team this year, their number one reasoning is continuity, right? This Pittsburgh team is running the same system. They're not going to be affected by the pandemic as much as everybody else. But I'm going to challenge that notion real quick because, yeah, they have continuity on the outside. Mike Tomlin's still there. Kevin Colbert's still there. It's all the same on the outside. But if you take a deep look into what this offense is going to look like this year, there are massive questions about this Steelers offense that need to be answered. And there are massive changes that might need to be made with this offense. What Steelers offense are we exactly returning here? Are we returning that putrid 2019 offense that was not creative or productive? Or are you trying to go back to 2018 with Big Ben back in there? Why does that matter? Because one offense throws the ball 25 times a game. The other offense throws the ball 45 times a game. That's a massive difference. That's a completely different offense than what they ran the year before. That's a change that they don't have a lot of time to practice. If that's true, that's not something that should be tossed aside because the Steelers have the same coaches last year. The offensive line I mentioned before has a lot of moving parts. They lost Ramon Foster, left guard, because he retired. They moved their right tackle to right guard, and now they have to have a new right tackle. That's a lot of moving parts on this offensive line. That's not something that's guaranteed to be good just because they have the same ownership and GM and head coach. You know, these are moving parts that are going to suffer because of the pandemic. And also, when you talk about continuity, how often has Ben thrown to any of these guys outside of Juju Smith-Schuster? He doesn't throw to James Washington is what we learned. He kind of likes Ryan Switzer, but everybody else is completely new to him. Chase Claypool, a rookie, and we all know how Ben doesn't really like rookies all that much, so we only know how many reps this guy's actually gotten with the first team. So there's a ton of questions about the Steelers offense that I don't think people are asking hard enough. I think people are just assuming 2018 is coming back, but I think the Steelers are a competent enough organization to know that Big Ben's not going to be 2018 Big Ben at 38 years old coming off surgery on his elbow. Even if he does look like that, they're going to want to limit the amount of times he passes so he doesn't fatigue that elbow and have more issues during the season. So what they're going to have to do is change the offense. They're going to have to throw less. And when you're talking about an offense that's used to being 45 pass attempts to 25 pass attempts, it's a massive change. I think they'll go 6-10 this year. Spam me in the comment section, Steeler fans. Hate me all you want. That's my honest thought about what I think the Steelers are in, because I think if this team wasn't called the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it was like the Washington football team or, God forbid, the Cleveland Browns, we would all rightfully see this as a 6-10 team. They're named the Steelers, and they get the Coast on brand recognition because they've won a lot. So that's their right. But I'm going to tell you right here, I think they're going to go 6-10. The Browns are an interesting team because on the outside looking in, they look like they're going to be the most affected team by this pandemic in this division because they're the only team that has a new head coach. They're the only team that has a new general manager. Now, I would argue that some of those things aren't as different as people make them seem because the core of this roster has been the same for the last 3 years, and they're returning to an offense that they ran in 2018. So this is not really new to guys like Baker, Jarvis, and Nick Chubb. Also, they had some free agency signings that they're going to expect to contribute, but Austin Hooper played under this system with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. Jack Conklin ran this exact same system in Tennessee, and Odell ran a similar offense to this at LSU and in New York. So it's new. But for all the veteran guys on this team, anybody who's been on this team more than 2 or 3 years, it's really not that new. It's just changing some terminology and getting it all put together on the field. Now, I'm not going to underrate that part. It's definitely going to affect this team, and that's definitely going to be a con. This offense isn't going to be ready week 1, but I don't think the transition and the change is going to be all that drastic. I think the change last year from what they did at the end of 2018 to what they did at the start of 2019 was a much bigger change than what the Browns are doing right now. I think this is going to actually be a smoother transition, I hope, than what Freddie Kitchens did to this offense last year. Now, let's speak of this offense, because last year the talk of the offense was, hey, we got all these tools, we got all these players, we got all this talent. This year, the talk of camp is that all that talent has looked like all that talent. Kareem Hunt has looked nothing short of amazing throughout camp. He's looked absolutely phenomenal. He looks like the guy who led the league in rushing yards in 2017. Same thing with Odell. He looks like 2016 Odell. He looks fast. He looks like he's having fun, athletic, making those circus catches, getting open all the time. He looks great. And Nick Chubb looks phenomenal. Those are 3 guys that if they look great, you have 3 all-pro players on your offense for a single team. That's insane. No other team really has that when it comes to depth on their offense and variety in their pieces. So that's really good. Another good sign is that Baker has looked much improved. He's looked so much better in this system. And there are a lot of advanced numbers that would suggest that in a system like this, Baker Mayfield's going to look pretty good because when he has done plays that this system relies on heavily, he's looked pretty good. So that on top of how he's looked in camp, he's looked crisp, he's looked good, he's looked like he's in better shape. He looks more athletic. I like what I saw from Baker Mayfield this camp. So I'm excited to see, and I think he's going to be a positive thing about this Browns camp when we look back on it. You got the tight ends, Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant, the rookie, looking very good out the gate in camp. And then also the offensive line has looked pretty fine so far. You know, it looks like those new pieces are being put together. Jedrick Wills is adjusting to playing left tackle. He is adjusting to kind of just being a tackle in the NFL, period. So there are going to be some growing pains there. He had a lot of penalties in Alabama. He's probably going to have a good amount of penalties in Cleveland. There's going to be some growing pains with Jedrick Wills, but I think overall he's going to be fine at that left tackle position. But that's all the good stuff. Let's talk about the bad stuff when it comes to the Browns. And you know where this is going to start. It's going to start with the defense. This defense will blow some leads in some games. I'm absolutely convinced that this defense is going to be the most frustrating part of this team and is going to blow some leads and make some games closer than they have any right to. The interior defensive line is still an issue. You signed Andrew Billings. He opted out for good reason. Now you don't have him, and now you don't have a replacement. You didn't sign Mike Daniels when he was available. I think that's going to be a mistake, and, you know, that's going to be an issue during the season. The inside run, I think, is going to be wide open against the Browns all year. To compound that, your linebackers have been unproven. Now, you had good news out of the linebackers because B.J. Goodson, Taki have looked good, and it looks like Mack Wilson will be back within 4 to 6 weeks of his hyperextended knee. So that looks good. I thought he was going to be out for the season. So the fact that he's not, that's great. But still, the question remains about how these linebackers are going to look because it's unproven. I'm not extremely confident in it, but I am much more confident in them than I was at the beginning of camp at the end of it, which is a good sign. Also, this pass rush. Outside of Myles Garrett, not impressed with it at all. Like, Porter Gustin has stood out because he's just been able to get some pressures in camp, but outside of that, there's not much. Adrian Claiborne hasn't looked that great. Olivier Vernon has not looked that great. You know, it's the same old stuff from the opposite end of Myles Garrett on this defensive line. It doesn't look great. It doesn't look like it's going to be able to hold up if he has to miss a game or something, or if he has to take a breather on offense. It looks like an issue. And I wouldn't be as concerned about it if I wasn't concerned about the linebacking room, the interior defensive line, and now the secondary I'm pretty concerned about. Because this secondary has good personnel. On paper, this secondary is very good. They're deep. Even with the injury to Grant Delpit, they're still deep. But the problem is that they've had so many injuries in that secondary throughout camp. Everybody's been dinged up at different times, and it's gotten to the point to where I don't think the first team unit has practiced a single snap together in practice. Because when Denzel's out there, Greedy's not out there. When Carl Joseph's out there, Sadejo's not out there. When Terrence Mitchell's out there, Greedy, Denzel Ward, and Carl Joseph are all not there. And this has led to some communication issues, them getting torn up by the second team in the scrimmage, and I think this secondary is going to be inconsistent. The personnel's good, so that will win out sometimes. They might get some turnovers, but overall, as a unit, they have some work to do, and they're going to have to do that during the season, which is going to lead to them giving up big plays, which is going to lead to them being pretty frustrating at the beginning parts of this season. And this only concerns me because the offense is probably not going to be ready for the first 2 games that are within like 5 days of each other, because you play Baltimore Sunday and then you turn around, play Cincinnati right after that on Thursday. Oh, by the way, both division games, both games that mean double when it comes to the standing. So I worry about that kind of turnaround and how they're going to look like. But I think after that Thursday night game, this offense at least is going to look a lot more crisp and smooth because they're going to have the extra days to practice and get things together. The defense might just be a year-long thing. I'm not confident that it's going to stop anytime soon. So my prediction for this Browns team is 10-6. I think they'll make the playoffs comfortably. I don't think they're going to be battling out at the end of the season to make sure they can get a spot. I think they're going to make the playoffs comfortably. I think they might even have a chance to win a playoff game. And I think if there's a team that's a prime candidate to do what the Titans did last year, which is get hot at the right time, it's the Cleveland Browns, because this is a team that is poised to get hot late. They might not win the division because they get off to a slow start, but they might be able to win a playoff game because of it. So hopefully that's in the cards for the Browns, but I think they're going to be 10-6, and I feel strongly about that 10-6. So there you have it. That's where you have the AFC North. I have the Ravens winning with a 12-4 record, the Browns in second place with a 10-6 record, the Bengals in third place with a 7-9 record, and the Steelers in last place with a 6-10 record. I feel pretty solid about those predictions. Now, I can probably be wrong. I'll probably be wrong because NFL is notoriously unpredictable. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.